Coming up in this episode of Pause, we'll be talking about drones, those things flying in the sky, and we'll learn a little bit about what's new with the law surrounding drones and what you might be seeing in the future flying through the neck of woods near you. That's coming up in this episode of Pause. Hi, I'm your host, Dr. Phil Hoffman, and welcome to Pause. And as promised, we're going to talk about drones, and we're talking to a professor at the University of Central Missouri who is a specialist in drones right now, Dr. Stephen Price. Dr. Price, welcome.
Thanks.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, for folks who don't even know what I'm talking about. When we say the word drone, I guess there could be some confusion because you hear about drones flying over and dropping bombs.
Right.
We're not talking about that kind of drone, right?
Right. We're talking about very small UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. And they're all actually unmanned, even the ones the military uses. But those are typically large drones with huge wingspans that can carry a payload. What we're talking about is tiny little helicopters about this big, and they carry a small camera. And that's about it.
So now it seems like everywhere we turn nowadays, there's a drone in the news. But how old are drones? Is this a technology that's relatively recent technology?
Well, the actual quadcopters that they have now are fairly recent. But you can look back, when I was growing up as a kid, even 30 years ago, there were radio-controlled helicopters and radio-controlled airplanes. And some of the argument now stems from, well, we've had these hobby toys for years. How are these any different now? But because there are so many of them, and because they've gotten to be so cheap, it's becoming an issue because people have access to them.
Now, I know that, as you mentioned, there have been remote-controlled aircraft for a long time, and I don't know, I have to admit, are there rules and regulations from the FAA about flying those?
Essentially, no. That's where I'm not an expert, is on the hobbyist side of things.
Right.
But the FAA actually comes in and says that they will only cover commercial use. So if you buy something and you fly it in your backyard just to have fun, it's hobbyist. It's a hobby use. There's nothing commercial about it. No money is changing hands. Nobody's paying you to do that. And you're not going to use any of that footage in a feature film or anything like that you're going to make money off of. So the FAA doesn't have a set of guidelines for that. They have a set of recommendations for hobbyist use. Don't fly at night. Don't fly outside of your line of sight. Don't fly over people or near people, things like that, that are sort of common sense sort of things.
So drones are a little bit different in that very quickly, it seems, that folks have started using them for commercial reasons, right?
Yeah, you've got people like me who got involved. I'm a filmmaker, and the types of shots you can get with a drone are just amazing. You can get shots from up high, you can get shots from down low, you can get moving shots, and the type of footage that can add to your film is really just really brings it to life. You could always get that footage before, but it meant renting a helicopter, or it meant getting really heavy Steadicam type of equipment, and the drone takes the place of a lot of this stuff. So for a filmmaker, it's a really useful tool. Other people are looking at them as tools as well. You've got people like roofers who, instead of going up on a ladder, now they can just fly a little drone up to look at the roof. People who install gutters, contractors, real estate agents are looking to get aerial shots of the house to put online to try to sell their houses. And farmers even are using drones to go out to the field and inspect the crops.
So these are the kind of uses that it kind of brings the FAA into the picture, right?
Yeah.
So when we look at the current state of regulation, and I know it's very fluid, so I know you're not going to be able to really give us a lot of direction here, but what are the rules that surround drones as we understand them right now?
Yeah, it's interesting. The FAA has not come out yet with their final guidelines. They've set some guidelines, and they've had several hearings to bring people in to say, hey, we agree with this or we agree with that, or this is going to be a problem or whatnot. One of the things, for instance, was the FAA at first wanted to require a commercial pilot's license to be able to fly these things commercially.
Wow.
And that's two very different things. And I think their point is well taken that you should know the laws about flying. But the flip side of that is, somebody like me, I don't need a pilot's license. I'm not, I don't want to get a pilot's license. I just want to fly something from the ground with a little controller. And so I think that set of expectations became quickly unrealistic. So they backed off on some things like that. There will probably be a ceiling built into their final guidelines. So if you go above this height, you need to have a commercial pilot's license. There will be geofencing involved, so you can't fly within 5 miles of an airport, or any restricted airspace for that matter. So there's people that buy the drones in Washington, D.C., and they can't fly them anywhere because it's all restricted airspace. There are other ones like you can't fly at night, you must maintain line of sight. There was a little bit of a talk at one point about the FAA requiring 2 people to operate a drone, one to watch it all the time and then the other one to fly it. And I don't know if that will make it into their final versions of the regulations or not.
So very fluid, like we said. I mean, who knows what the final regulations are going to look like, but is there a timetable for when they're supposed to release those?
They keep pushing it back. I don't, I think they're doing the right thing in the sense that they're getting a lot of input from people that this will affect. They really have no incentive whatsoever to allow people to use drones. Commercial flight, yes, people need to get from point A to point B. Airplanes are the best way to do it. But I think drones, the FAA kind of views right now as more of a nuisance.
Right.
And hobbyists have really given it that reputation. There's been some things in the news about people flying near airports. When the wildfires were out in California, people were flying over the fires as airplanes were flying over and trying to dump water. Things like that I think people flying drones recklessly have sort of given that a bad name.
Now, before we get into more of that kind of stuff, I want to take a step backwards because I realize we haven't really actually talked about physically, what a drone is, how it works, how you fly it. So I know that's been something that, as part of your research that you're doing at University of Central Missouri, you've really been working on that. So can you kind of, for somebody who's never seen one, never handled one, can you kind of go through how it operates and the pieces that you need to have to make it all work?
Yeah, I really should have brought it in here, but there might not be room to spread everything out on the table either. But they're about this big. The quadcopters typically have 4 rotors. They make ones with 6 and ones with 8, and they range from size from about this big to bigger. The smaller ones typically have a camera built in, or they mount a GoPro camera or something like that on it. The bigger ones, you can actually mount a cinema camera or a DSLR or something like that. The newer ones actually have cameras with some interchangeable lenses that are kind of neat. So one of the knocks on the GoPro, or the current model that I've got, which is the DJI not spreading wings. It's a DJI model that has a 4K camera built in, but there's not any way to zoom in or zoom out. And so you've got a fixed lens on the camera. And so the newer ones with interchangeable lenses, you could get a zoom or zoom out. The larger ones, obviously if you have a DSLR on it, it's hard to remote operate that camera. So you're typically looking at also a fixed shot with them. But as far as how they operate, the DJI model I have, you have to mount a smartphone or a tablet or something like that onto it and actually connect it. Then you have to launch the DJI app. And the app will give you the video of what you're seeing through the camera. It'll give you the altitude, it'll give you the distance, it'll give you the battery information on it. You can set different modes for the camera from there. You can tilt it up or down. The camera's mounted on a gimbal. So as you fly, it sort of steadies itself. It's a very stable shot, which is another reason why people love them for cinematography. And you use the app, you use the controller, and it's kind of like playing a video game at that point. You're just kind of flying it. I find that as I fly it, I have to both look at the drone and at the video, both kind of back and forth, to be able to really kind of figure out what I'm doing and what I want to do next to get the shot that I want. If I focus too much on the video, I lose track of the drone. I've actually, ran into a tree with one because I was looking at the video and I thought I had room to back up. I couldn't see behind the thing, and so I ran into a tree, which is common with them. I've been trying to teach some students, and I say, it's likely you're going to crash it at some point. It's just something you got to kind of get past and get over. And
so the actual ground station basically really is a phone or an iPad or something like that?
Yeah, connected to the controller. Some of them have the app essentially built into the controller, and so you don't have to connect a smartphone to it. But more and more, I think they're going to the smartphone because it's easier for them to update the app than it is to do a firmware update for the controller.
Sure.
And everybody has a smartphone these days.
And the actual unit itself, it consists of the rotors, however many rotors there are, the mount for the camera, and then I assume batteries in the drone, right? But it's a pretty simple device, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. One of the things I'm looking at is when I ran into the tree, it bent a little piece of the body. And it doesn't affect the flight operation or anything, but it's cosmetic. And I thought, well, I wonder if I could fix that. So I looked online, and you can buy a replacement body for it for $50. And you'd have to take the wiring out, take the motors out, take the motherboard out, and put it into the new one. But I mean, all of the parts on it are pretty much replaceable. You could probably buy all the parts separately and even build your own for this specific DJI model.
So the actual unit itself, after you crashed it, I mean, I always think back, when you were a kid and you had the little balsa wood airplane, and one wreck and it's just trash. So they're fairly sturdy, I guess?
They're fairly sturdy, within reason. I mean, they're plastic. There was one that collided with a manned aircraft, and I'm pretty sure there's nothing left of it.
Right.
But for the most part, if I've flipped one over before when I didn't have GPS lock on a windy day, and it started getting away from me and kind of flipped over. Didn't do any damage. A GA of mine was flying it, and it kind of ran into a tree limb, and there was some green and brown paint-looking stuff on the drone, but everything was fine. And like I said, I ran into a tree and dented the body. But it's pretty resilient, and I think they make them, like I said, you can replace almost all the parts. You can replace the motherboard, you can replace any of the motors, you can replace the propellers on it. So it's made to be not wrecked, but it's made to withstand some stuff and replace the stuff when it's broken.
Now, there's been a lot of, you talked earlier about things in the news as it relates to drones. There have been a lot of stories out there. Like any field, when something is new and sort of evolving, you got a lot of things going on. One of the interesting things, as I was preparing to talk to you today, that I've seen recently is stories about people who are flying these drones to do investigative journalism of some kind. So they're flying, in some cases it's been over farms, it's been over closed compounds, things like that, to try to show the inner workings of something that they normally would not have access to without flying over it. And so now it sounds to me like the law still isn't clear about airspace and whether you have a right to expect that somebody's not flying a drone over you.
Yeah. My understanding of our privacy laws is they never had to go vertically with them. And so that's going to be something that will probably play out in the courts as much as the FAA guidelines. You mentioned earlier, before we started shooting, that there was an instance where a guy shot down a drone that was over his property, and you told me the courts came down that he had the right to shoot down that drone, I guess, because I would assume because of invasion of privacy. Or because it's over his own property, and anything on his property, he can determine the course of action. But that's the type of thing that I think will probably play out in the courts. As far as investigative journalists using it, that's going to be an interesting one, because again, the courts are going to have to balance privacy versus the public's right to know. And so if the public's right to know supersedes the privacy rights of the person, I think the courts might side on the side of journalists, but it's a new territory, as with any new technology.
Right. It's interesting to me because in many ways, none of this is new. You could have rented a plane and flown over wherever you wanted to fly and shoot and do all of those things. So in some ways, it's not really any different. But I think maybe it's just the sheer ease of accessibility now and relatively cheap. I mean, before renting an airplane was a pricey endeavor, but as you mentioned, buying a drone not quite as pricey.
I looked online this morning, and their B&H is running a sale where you can buy one for I think $130 with a 4K camera on it.
Wow.
Yeah.
$130.
Yeah. And so that provides access that we've never had before, and quite frankly, I don't think the FAA was prepared for. I think before, when it was mostly hobbyists or you had to rent an airplane or something like that, the FAA could kind of decide on a case-by-case basis almost. And now it's kind of a wild west of technology as far as they're concerned. I think it's uncharted territory for them.
Well, and I have to say, and I know as a filmmaker you'll appreciate this, I sort of look at the current zeal for, this aerial footage, and I think back to when we decided to take cameras off tripods and everything was shaky, and then there was the Steadicam, and then everything was very fluid. And so this seems to me to be just another one of those tools that in and of itself is a complement to what you're doing. But right now we're in that zone where everything is aerial.
Yeah.
Right? I mean.
Yeah, so I did some work with house hunters about a year ago, and they really wanted drone footage in every episode. And it was kind of this unique aesthetic that added something to it that was pretty cool. And most of the time when I watch house hunters, it really kind of adds to it. It adds this really nice touch of movement, but only if you use it as, an establishing shot, or a bumper shot in between for a transitional shot or something like that. If you try to use the drone to tell the story, it gets kind of awkward. So if you're shooting with the drone over here, our dialogue, it won't come off well. It's a fairly stable shot, but like you said, it adds a little bit of shakiness to it, and panning and tilting is really tough to do smoothly with a drone. And so you want to get that, high up shot or establishing shot or something like that, but then get away from the drone and switch to a Steadicam or switch to a mounted camera or something like that. Yeah.
And it also gives you, I think of films like the end of High Noon, for example. Folks that are in our field have always grown up studying these works, and anytime that they have the great big jib or crane shot at the end where they're kind of showing you the overall scene, that's always something that I think people like you and me, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, I've always wanted to be able to do that and couldn't. But now we can with something like a drone, so maybe that accounts for part of it too.
Even the opening shot in Batman Begins, or the other one with the one with the Joker,
right? And
they're sliding across the high wire up top, and I'm pretty sure they probably had a helicopter to shoot that. But these days you could do it for $1,500 with a drone. Yeah.
So that's a big change, obviously, and one of the things that I know you're working on is, while we're in the Wild West right now and we have all this development and the law is very fluid and no one's really sure where it's going, you're trying to sort of get out ahead of that in your position as a professor at the University of Central Missouri and be prepared to help guide folks who want to get licenses or whatever it winds up being, to get training so they can be certified in this. What's the plan for that?
Yeah, let me back up just a little bit. So what UCM, for example, is going to have to do, and anybody who wants to fly them commercially, right now basically has to petition the FAA to be exempted from their guidelines for commercial pilots. So what we're actually asking for is basically the FAA to exempt us from being covered by them. Once that happens on campus, we will have to have our own policy in place. So basically, we're asking the FAA to let us govern ourselves as far as our airspace and the use of drones. So I'm working with the Department of Aviation to develop a drone policy for the campus of UCM. And that will entail things like putting out signs before you fly. That'll entail things like not flying over people's heads. There will be some FAA guidelines that we will want people to follow, but then also some specific campus guidelines that we'll want people to follow as well. Once we have that in place and we have our exemption, the plan is to develop a training program at UCM where we can market it not only to our own students who want to do film, who want to do aviation, but want to learn this side of it as well. We want to develop a drone training program where we can bring in people from Kansas City who want to be roofers and contractors and want to, not want to be, but who are and want to use this technology, and train them how to fly it, but also, and more importantly, train them on the FAA guidelines and things like that so that they're flying it safely. Because as you probably know, when people are out there in the Wild West doing whatever they want to, it makes it harder on the people who want to do it legally and safely, but use it as an effective tool.
And for us, we've stayed away entirely from drones. We don't presently shoot anything with drones, because my concern is, and I've seen stories about this where even though you have the sort of auto return function on a lot of them, but wind speed and battery life, sometimes the variables don't line up. And you've seen these things drop out of the sky, and although they don't weigh much typically, especially the smaller ones don't weigh a whole lot, when you think of something dropping on your head from 200 feet, even if it doesn't weigh a lot, it can really hurt or kill somebody if it falls on them at that inopportune moment.
Yeah, and of course, so personal damage to people is a primary concern when we talk about the safety of these things, but also property damage. If it falls on a car, same thing. If it runs into a window of a building, how do you go about navigating the legal aspects of all of that, property damage and things like that as well?
It's going to be complicated, and I imagine we're going to wind up maybe sort of like needing to have insurance like you do to drive your car, right? Does that seem like a possibility?
I haven't heard any talk of that, but I would envision a future where if you're flying these commercially, you might have to purchase some sort of insurance where if you do damage as a result of flying it, that you would be covered. Because if one falls out of the sky that you're flying and it hurts somebody, you might be liable for their medical bills, things like that.
It's an interesting universe. It's a complicated universe, and as you said earlier, though, I mean, for those of us that make television or make films for a living, there is just an absolute beauty to being able to shoot this way that you can't really get any other way.
Yeah.
Well, if you look forward and you think, okay, here are the stages that we're going through now, we're going through this Wild West, do you imagine could there be sort of a bifurcated future where there's sort of a commercial universe and there still is a hobbyist universe for drones, or do you think it's going to have to be tightly regulated as a commercial entity would be?
I said earlier, I am not an expert on the hobbyist area of this, and one of the aspects of that that I just don't know the answer to is if the FAA has any jurisdiction over hobbyist use of this, and I don't know the answer to that. What I think an ideal future when it comes to drones would entail would be a little bit looser regulations probably on the commercial side of things. I do think that one of the things they're talking about is aircraft registration. I think that's essential. I think you should have numbers on your aircraft as you fly it, because if it lands in a field a mile away and does some property damage, you might not go claim that. But if you have it registered somewhere with a number, they know that's your drone and you're responsible for it. So I think things like that are essential and don't necessarily apply to the hobbyist side of things, although maybe it does. But I think some looser guidelines as far as the pilot's license thing and stuff like that on the commercial side of things would be nice, and an easier way to go about getting the Section 333 exemption. Right now, the ones that they've granted have typically hired lawyers and had help navigating that process because it's complicated. But I think on the hobbyist side of things, if they have the jurisdiction to step in, I think there needs to be a little bit tighter regulation. I would guess that some of these things where the drone collided with the aircraft or is over the wildfire or something like that might have been hobbyists that just didn't know any better.
Did you ever imagine when you were in film school that you would be doing this and working with attorneys constantly and talking to the FAA?
No, not at all. No, I couldn't even tell you how I got involved in this. My department chair, Art Reynolds, went and got a drone and was interested in flying it and maybe seeing how we could incorporate it into cinematography. And even when he brought it to me and I flew it a little bit, I was like, okay, so what, whatever. And then when we started talking about the roofers and the contractors and developing this training program on campus, I thought, this is definitely an area. This is a market out there that is really untapped right now. So I started getting involved.
Well, we'll see where it goes,
Yeah.
right? Well,
Yeah.
Stephen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. That's Dr. Stephen Price. He is our local expert here on drone technology, and we will keep you updated on that as it flies around into the future. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Dr. Phil Hoffman. We'll see you next time right here on Pause.